Hey guys, welcome to Sectionalism Day 5. We are almost to the Civil War, which is my favorite time period in American history. Just to give you a heads up, if you think I was nerdy before, just get ready. I'm not even going to tell you half of the stories I know about the Civil War. So just know that it could be worse. I'm actually toning it down a little bit. But anyway, so when we left off, Abraham Lincoln had been elected president in 1860, and the southern states were not happy about that. There had been a lot of tension between the North and South. The last thing that had made the South mad was in 1859, John Brown led a group of abolitionists, including his sons, to start a slave rebellion in Harper's Ferry, Virginia, which didn't go so well for him. His sons were all killed. He was captured and executed, so yeah, I'd say it was probably a failure, but what it did succeed in doing is making the South mad. So the South is going to form a new country called the Confederate States of America. In a confederacy, just like the Articles of Confederation back, it was our first constitution, it's a government where states have more power than the government, than the national government. So anyway, but this is made up of 7 states. Originally, 4 more are going to join, which we'll talk about here in a second. And they have an election, and they choose Jefferson Davis as their president. Jefferson Davis had experience in warfare. He was the Secretary of War for Buchanan? I should have looked that up before I started this. I'm not 100% sure on that, so if I'm wrong, just know that I wasn't sure in the first place. But anyway, he had experience with war. So it's actually going to help the Confederacy to have somebody that's experienced in war, whereas Abraham Lincoln doesn't. He has to rely on his generals and commanders and stuff. But anyway, so Jefferson Davis, apparently, though, when he was given news that he'd won the election, it's almost as if he had been given a death sentence. When he got the letter saying that he had won, his shoulders kind of slumped down, and yeah, he wasn't happy because he knew it was going to be a tough job. You're creating a government out of nothing. You've got to figure out all this stuff. He knows that it's probably going to lead to war anyway. But during his speech as the first president of the Confederacy, he cites the Declaration of Independence, which was written by the guy that he's named after, Thomas Jefferson, and he says that, just like Jefferson said in the Declaration, when a government is not looking after the people, it's the people's job to overthrow that government, right? So in this case, they felt like the United States government was not looking after the South and not looking after states' rights, and so they were going to overthrow that government. You can see their points. You can also see Abraham Lincoln's points. States can't just leave whenever they feel like it. Anyway, so that is going to lead us to the beginning of the Civil War, the first shots. All right, so we'll get that in a second. So here's the situation. All right, the southern states, a lot of them have seceded and formed their own country. What's kind of awkward about that is there are forts and stations in the South that have government troops in it. And so a lot of those forts give up, they surrender. Some of those forts had all Southerners in them, so they just, they turn to the Confederate side. But there's one fort that's going to cause problems for the Confederacy, and that is Fort Sumter. Right? Its commander, this guy named Robert Anderson, is loyal to the Union, to the North. And so Fort Sumter is going to be a thorn in the side for Charleston, South Carolina. Here's the city of Charleston. Here's Charleston Harbor. Here's Fort Sumter. Any ship coming into Charleston is going to have to go by Fort Sumter, which means it could possibly be blown out of the water by the cannons. So what the Confederates do, you can see here all these little red squares are groups of cannons, are forts or batteries that they have aiming at Fort Sumter. But nobody wants to shoot, right? Lincoln has told Fort Sumter, don't shoot, but also don't surrender. The Confederate guys have said, don't shoot at the fort yet. We don't want to start a war. So it's kind of the standstill. Now, what the Confederates want to do, And this is what people have been doing since ancient times, since, prehistory. If you want to take a city, if you want to take a town or a castle, you just surround it with your army, and you make sure that they can't get food, and then once they start to starve, they usually give up, right? So that's what they're going to do in Fort Sumter. They have no way of getting supplies, really. I guess they could go fishing, but that's probably not going to feed a group of several hundred soldiers. So Fort Sumter, they're just going to wait for it to starve out. However, Lincoln is going to mess that up, because Lincoln's a smart guy. He's like, how can I get the Confederates to start this war without firing the first shot, right? You don't want to be the guy that fires the first shot, because then you're the bad guy. So Lincoln sends a letter to the commander of the Confederate cannons, the guy that's in charge of all these red dots here, and he says, hey, just going to let you know that I'm sending a ship with no weapons, no reinforcements, like no extra soldiers, nothing. All it's going to have is food, right? It's going to deliver supplies to these guys in Fort Sumter. That's all it's going to do. Just giving you a heads up, just letting you know. So now the Confederates, the Southerners, have to decide, okay, are we going to shoot at Fort Sumter and destroy it, like capture it by shooting at it, or are we just going to let it sit there forever, right? As long as Lincoln keeps sending ships, these guys are not going to run out of food. They might kind of go crazy because they're stuck in a fort and they're bored, but just like we're doing right now, we're all stuck at home going crazy. But anyway, so the Confederates decide to start shooting. On April 6th, no, April 12th. 1 second. April 12th. See, I get my, because this is kind of the Lexington and Concord of the Civil War, so I get that mixed up with, I get it mixed up with Lexington and Concord. Both were in April, so anyway, I knew it was April 12th. April 12th, the Confederates opened fire, and this is considered the beginning of the Civil War. This is the opening shots. This is the kickoff of the Civil War. Now, I got to tell you several stories because it's so ironic. So first thing about Fort Sumter, the commander of Fort Sumter is a guy named Robert Anderson. He had been, before the war started, before this all happened, he was a teacher at West Point, which is a military college. It's a military school, and he taught, one of his classes was artillery, how to shoot cannons, right? How to set up the cannons, like what the best place to put them on the battlefield is, and how to aim them and stuff. And ironically, one of his young students before the war was a guy named P.G.T. Beauregard. If you're wondering what P.G.T. stands for, it's Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard. So P.G.T. Beauregard is easier to say. But Beauregard is in charge of all the cannons aimed at Fort Sumter. So it's kind of ironic that the teacher of artillery, one of his students, is now shooting cannons at him. Another ironic thing is nobody dies in Fort Sumter. They fire for 36 hours at Fort Sumter, and Fort Sumter fires back at them, and nobody dies. So I guess he wasn't a very good teacher. The bloodiest war in our history was started by a completely bloodless battle. Nobody died. Now, another ironic thing about Fort Sumter is the only two guys that did die, it was after the battle. Fort Sumter fired off a salute, right? They fired off some cannons to say, good job, good game, whatever, to the Confederates. And when they fired off one of the cannons, it exploded. It wasn't, when they made the cannon, it wasn't cast right, and it blew up, and it killed two guys. So the only casualties of Fort Sumter were at the surrender ceremony when they were saluting the Confederates. But anyway, so after Fort Sumter, Lincoln calls for 75,000 men to make an army to invade the South, and that convinces 4 more southern states to join the Confederacy. The most important was Virginia. Virginia was on the fence about joining the Confederacy, But after Fort Sumter, they vote to secede and join the Confederate States of America. They're going to move the capital city of the Confederacy to Richmond, Virginia, which is pretty close to Washington, D.C. It's kind of weird. And yeah, so Virginia was the most populous southern state. It had the most people, so it's going to provide the most soldiers. It's got some of the best leaders are from Virginia. Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson are from Virginia. It's got the most supplies and crops and stuff out of the southern states. So Virginia was very important to the Confederacy. So after Fort Sumter, 4 more states joined. So that makes a grand total of 11 southern states in the Confederacy. So that's how the Civil War begins. Fort Sumter, nobody dies, but it officially starts the Civil War. So there you go, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. I will